You've helped the Oval Invincibles men go back-to-back, famously at Lord's last year. Hat-trick?
Yeah, three-peat, hopefully.
That's You're already calling, aren't you?
Data, without a doubt, played two massive roles in my career. Our data back in the early 2000s was early doors, hit the new ball, into the river, get it wet, and they had to bowl the wet ball for 40 overs. First chat GPT for cricket.
Pretty much, yeah. So it just sort of gave another live decision-making tool.
What would you like me to call that on commentary? Go on. The Jose Boutelier version of matchups.
Can we call it?
I'm Stuart Broad, he's Jos Buttler, a bit of a sweaty Jos Buttler. What was your journey in here?
I'm a line biker, so I'm trained to Paddington, then I jump on the bike for a little half an hour jaunt down here.
It's electric, why are you sweating?
I work hard, actually. It's a bit of a rat race, actually. It's quite competitive out there on the bikes.
Get your elbows out.
Get my elbows out, get my helmet on, and get down here. So what are we up to today?
Yeah, it's a big one, Jose. This special episode is brought to you by our friends at Sage, the official insights partner of the 100. Using data and insights to bring you closer to the biggest decisions in cricket. To help your small business grow with AI tools like Sage Copilot, visit sage.com.
No, really looking forward to this episode. We are joined by Freddie Wilde, IPL winner with the RCB, 100 winner with the Oval. What went wrong for us, Fred, when I was captain and you were working with England?
Yeah.
But no, great to have you with us. We're going to do a bit of a deep dive on analysis and how that plays a huge part in the game. Broady, you've played for a long time. You obviously finished now, but what sort of changes did you notice in analysis and how much of it there was or how it's grown in the last few years?
Huge amount. When I first started, it was very much looking at opposition players and little stats that could help you. That was it, really. And the analyst would just be in the changing room plotting the games and studying that way. And to when I finished, the data available, we all had apps on our phone that you could click on any player in the world and figure out technical weaknesses, and through stats, the information just grew. But I think how it's grown in the modern game to actually picking sides, picking who to spend money on in auctions is pretty incredible, really. And data, I was a bit of a data geek, to be honest. I loved getting all the information and filter what I needed out of it. I know some players get a bit scared by data, don't they? But yeah, I think it's a great thing for the game, and something that other sports have had for a long period of time, hasn't it? Maybe cricket were a bit slow, but I think it plays a crucial role.
Where does it start for you, Fred? Let's say, example with RCB, you've just come from winning that tournament. So preparing for an auction or sort of that role, what sort of role is given to you as the analyst, and how do you take a lead from the coach or captain and those kind of things?
Yeah, well, that's where it starts. The retentions of the auction is the beginning. That's when you're compiling your squad, and it goes all the way through, I guess, right up to match day when you're doing preparation for the game itself. And you're right to mention the coach. I think that the nature of work that you do as an analyst is massively influenced, I think, by the coach that you've got. There'll be some coaches, as you guys know, like you mentioned, players, some guys like it, some guys don't. Some coaches also will be well into it and some won't be so much into it. And I think the extent to which they want you to be getting stuck into the numbers will dictate how much work you do. Like in any walk of life, if your boss says we want you to do this, then you go away and do it. And with RCB, Mo, Bobat and Andy Flower are both pretty data driven. So I was involved right from the get-go there in terms of, firstly, you start with retentions, who we're going to retain. And that's a massive moment, really. I think people think that it starts at the auction, but actually your whole auction plan will be based on the 3, 4, 5 retentions that you make at that stage. And that's where you really begin to start going down a certain path. So you spend time thinking about who you're going to retain, and then that leads into auction planning, which, yeah, you can get very detailed, and you build the squad from there.
So a coach would come to you and go, I need a middle order batter, left arm spinner for my retentions. Who's lining up the best stats wise? Or do you go through all the data and go, do you know what, this player's really undervalued, we could maybe retain at a better price?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, really. Like there'll be times where I think with the retentions, sometimes it's quite obvious who you might retain. Like let's use RCB, we're going to retain Virat. Okay, that's one that's just not necessarily going to be much of a debate. But there might be other players there who are sort of like, you understand that they've done well in your last few seasons, but there might be a couple. Maybe you're debating, for example, at RCB we had Mohammad Siraj and we had Yash Dayal, left arm quick. We ended up going with Yash Dayal. And we didn't retain Siraj. So there were sort of obvious players for whom you were going to debate. And at that point, you'd go away and you'd probably pull together some numbers, just kind of, what's the evidence? What have they actually done in the last few seasons? So we can see that. And then quite often we'll get on a Zoom call, or it might be an in-person meeting, and you'll sit around with the coaches, with the director of cricket, the scouts and just sort of have a debate, and the numbers are contributing to that debate, really. But you're right to sort of draw attention to the auctions and the drafts, because that is a massive part of an analyst's job now in domestic cricket, and it's where, you know, a lot of tournaments not won and lost, because you still have to go onto the pitch and do it. But if you have a good auction, you set yourself up really well for the season itself.
Just in terms of, say, the data that's available, there's masses, right? And I could go and buy data if I wanted, or Broady could go and get. How do you filter that and sort of look at the numbers or whatever? What sort of questions are you asking the numbers to give you an edge over when I look at it and see something? Or how do you make it specific for you as an RCB team to your venue? Sort of, what is it, like Google? Have you got like a search tool within that, or how do you sort of make it really specific to sort of make sense of the numbers and give it an edge? It's not just, you don't go on Quick Info and say his economy rate's X and this guy's Y. Like, how do you actually make sense of it and give you the true meaning of what the data is actually telling you?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. So there's two parts to it, really. The first one is like, how do you actually sort of analyze and interrogate the data itself? And yeah, it's not quite Google, but like there are different platforms that you can use. I use CricViz's platform, but there are multiple other ones where basically it's a database that's set up in a way for you to ask questions of it. So as you said, anyone could buy all of the data, but then the companies that you can then access this software off aggregate it and organize it in a way that means I can ask questions. In terms of the questions itself, I think different teams will have different things that they're looking for. And quite often that will, again, we'll use RCB as an example. We had a way, you know, Mo and Andy and the coaches sat down and had a sort of way in mind of how they wanted to play their cricket. You know, for example, it might be we want to be really aggressive in the power play, and most teams might have that. But as a result, you start looking at metrics that indicate players who are that. So it might be things like strike rate in the power play or strike rate in the first 10 balls of their innings. And then maybe more specifically, if you've got an opening partnership, you might want to have one who's good against pace, one who's good against spin, so that you're building a partnership where teams can't exploit you. Often it's the sort of, how do you want to play? And that's a framework that's normally dictated to by the coaches. They'll have an idea of, you know, the type of cricket they want to play. It might be influenced by the venue. And that will then lead you to the questions that you want to ask and provide the data. And the data then is just one of a thing that contributes to the debate. You know, you'll have your view, the coaches will have their view, and I'll have the data, and it's all together, and then you try and make a decision to help you win, I guess.
Freddie, why don't you take us into the sort of pressure moments? I know you do a huge amount of research, huge amount of prep leading into drafts and auctions, but the time-sensitive moments, say the Oval Invincibles draft or you're on the clock in the auction. Have you ever had times where people are looking at you like, come on then, we need a decision right now on this data, and you've got like 30 seconds to make a huge decision?
Not quite at me. Like you feel the eyes of the room on your table without a doubt. But I think if you've done your prep well, and most teams do now, and we were particularly thorough at RCB, you go into it. It's probably a bit like preparing for a big game. You feel like you've done your training, and at that point, you're sort of like you're backing yourself to go and execute to an extent. And we've had our plan. We've come up with it. And then you kind of just go and do it. But there are pressure moments.
Has there been a player that you can look at yourself, whether it's in franchise cricket or someone that's come through in international cricket, where you've gone, do you know what? I did the data, I looked at that player and thought, they've got a real chance, going to recommend them to a coach?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I'm never going to take 100% responsibility for players that are picked. It's obviously a combination of like the coach at the end of the day has to make the call. There are a few. I mean, there was one right at the start of my career when I was working for the Melbourne Renegades. I remember I was very big when he's not a young player. He's actually quite old at the time. But Mohammed Nabi was someone who I pushed quite hard with them, and he ended up having a good career for the Renegades. Did a couple of years working for them. And then more recently, I mean, this is probably a combination with there's a couple of analysts who work at Oval, but we were quite keen on Donovan Ferreira, who we signed last year, and then he's going to play with us again this year. Hard-hitting, lower-order player, who, again, like these are players on the up, and it's not like, you know, we're not plucking a name out of absolutely nowhere, but it's that you're throwing a name out there whose numbers are excellent, and it's like, okay, well, hang on a second, I hadn't thought about that guy, and then you have a conversation with the coach, and you know he maybe does a bit of digging with his local state coaches or whatever, and you end up going for him, and yeah, it's a nice feeling when you do that, because again, talking about where the analyst makes a difference, I keep going back to the drafts, the auctions. That's where you can make the biggest difference, because something like that can happen.
Yeah, I just think on that's where you can add the most value as well, because obviously there's the star names that everyone knows about, and they're in short supply, aren't they, and for a high price. But if you can pick out someone that suddenly you think is undervalued by the numbers that you're looking at. They match up with a good character and they fit your team and you get them in. And that predictive element that you're hoping they'll go on to become the star player, you might get them for 2 or 3 years at a sort of value price, right? And that's quite big in the auctions, for example, to allows you to spend more money on other players or something where you need more of something, or right, we actually need this X factor player. We need to push our number on this player. But if you can find that value, I think that's one of the areas where you'd make the biggest difference. And I was just thinking on that, what parameters do you then specifically look at that aren't just your generic normal numbers? And how, I always think with data, how do you use it as a predictive element? Like, how do you not just look at historic data and it's what they've done to this point? So an example may be so-and-so doesn't play spin well according to their historic data, but you might have to talk to a coach who's like, I feel like there's an area we can really improve him, or he's just not being put in the right area, if that makes sense. So is there two parts to that question?
Yeah, so I'll do the parameters one first. I think that in T20 cricket in particular, the parameters that you look at will be massively influenced by the type of player and the role that they are going to fulfill. So, for example, I already drew attention to like the power play batter for an opening batter, like just like yourself. You'd be looking at things that are related to the power play. How quickly can they start? So power play strike rate, first 10 ball strike rate, and then specifically against types of bowlers in the power play, because obviously there are only 2 men out. So that's in the power play. Whereas when you're looking, for example, at the back end, you'll be looking more specifically at like death overs economy rate or death overs boundary percentage. So you're trying to make it as specific as possible to the role of the player that you're trying to sign. If I just look at, always remember the story about Jade Dernbach. He had like the highest economy rate for England in T20 international cricket for like a really long time, but like it was a little bit before talking about like death overs economy rate was kind of a thing that happened in the media, and it was pretty obvious to anyone who played with Dernbach or who watched much cricket of him playing, was that his economy rate was partly as high as it was because he always bowled right at the end.
Yeah.
I think Dernbach actually got a lot of unfair stick for that because he was a bit of a revolutionary in how he went about a lot of his work. He'd, back of hand slur balls, etc. And he got a lot of stick, but he bowled the really tough overs. So isolating it just to look at the death overs, for example, or immediately makes that a sort of easier comparison for him and other bowlers. And he might still have had a high economy rate, but the point was it's a little bit of a more fair comparison than, say, looking at someone who always takes the new ball. So the first and most important thing is about making it as specific as possible to the player. The second question around predicting and sort of what it looks like in the future, that is a more difficult thing to do. And I think that's where I'd probably just like to draw attention to the other kind of emerging role in data analysis, which is I'm an analyst. Quite often now, companies or teams will also employ data scientists. So these are guys who are, I might be labeled as a nerd by some people, but these guys are mega nerds, and they're building complex algorithms that are designed to try and take all of the data that we've got and try and look forward with it. So as you said, to some extent, sometimes you can't do that perfectly, but we're going to try. They will try and do it as well as they can, and that in T20 cricket, a really good example of how that works is like, there are obviously all these different competitions, the Big Bash, the PSL, the SA20, the IPL. They're all different standards. So the data scientists will do work to try and adjust those performances so that we can understand, all right, fine, if someone's, averaging 30 and striking at 130 in the Blast, what does that mean for their likely performance in the IPL? We'll try and translate it. And the work that they do is increasingly important. And I think the relationship, we talk about like relationship between captain and coach in cricket, or maybe now analyst and coach or analyst and captain. In the back room, the relationship between the analyst and the data scientist is important. Because if I'm going to go to, Andy Flower and Mo Bobat and talk to them about a player that I might be recommending, based on data that the data scientist has produced, I need to understand, I don't know how to build the model, but I need to understand how it works so that I can then go with confidence and say, look, I really believe this guy's good based on X, Y, and Z. So the data scientists are the guys doing quite a lot of, and these are people who could, super smart guys. You probably could be working, as a quant in the city or something, but teams are employing them. And you see in football, Man City will probably have 50 backroom analysts and data scientists.
I was going to say, when's that sort of come in then into cricket, or what you've experienced from the analyst to data scientists and these predictive models?
Yeah.
Is that really recent? And also, what else is there that you think is not scratched the surface yet of data in cricket? Because I feel like cricket's always been a little bit resistant to data, and certain players can be a bit or or sort of a bit skeptical. Whereas I look at some of the other sports, and I've probably changed my own mind on this, and it's very data driven. Like you mentioned, football, how many analysts they would have, and how involved the coach might be from off the field. We've always sort of seen cricket as a captain runs the, we prepare, and then it's the captain's job, on the field, and then we review it after. So what things do you think can come into cricket from data as well that's not quite there yet, either from other sports or just from your own point of view, that you think you can add more value?
Yeah, well, the biggest one at the moment, which is beginning to become more popular, it seems like a really obvious one, but cricket hasn't found a way to record it yet, which is just the field positionings. Like we're seeing now on Sky when you're commentating, you've got that field map, and it happens in the IPL as well now. Getting hold of that data and doing stuff with it to better understand how the field influences things. Because I've sat, Jos, with you in meetings or with fast bowlers, and you'll talk about this being a plan, but they'll say, but if you put two men out, how do they respond? Or if you have a split field, how do they respond? Being able to actually answer that question is massive, and it's beginning to become a thing now, because that's essentially player tracking. So it's just an improvement in technology that enables us to know where the fielders are. So that's a really obvious one. I think as well, like the other sort of intangible, and you mentioned the imaginary player you were saying who maybe was really good at spin, and understanding that kind of data, which I guess is more like coach feedback. So even like logging that kind of data. So that's how we record data from scouts, is you'll talk to the scout and they might rank them on a scale of, say, 1 to 5 as to how competent they are against different types of bowling. That is still data in of itself. And if you get lots of scouts giving you that data and actually putting that into your predictive models and better understanding the influence of that. So his numbers aren't good against spin when he's played T20 cricket, but all the scouts and the coaches are saying this guy is an excellent player of spin. That is worth something. And ideally, the models in the future will start to incorporate that in. So that's not necessarily measuring anything other than someone's opinion, but that is, that's still data. It's still useful.
Yeah.
But data-wise, interested in your career, Jos, did you use it for any big decisions? Because when I was playing in the T20 stuff and you'd just started, you were this 6-7. He's a great finisher. Get him in for the last 5 overs. He can reverse scoop. And then suddenly you went up to the top of the order, and that really suits your T20 game. What made the decision to go up there? Did someone come to you and go, do you know what, you're wasting your talent at 5. Get up open the batting.
It came from Mahela Jayawardene, actually, at Mumbai Indians. So I'd signed to play for Mumbai Indians. They were my first team in the IPL. And the first season, I batted in the middle order, that 5, 6, 7 role, around Hardik Pandya, Kieran Pollard. We had Krunal Pandya as well. And I remember clearly before the next IPL, Mahela Jayawardene had just become coach and phoned me to say, I've got a bit of a off-the-cuff idea. We've got the middle order covered. I feel like you could be a bit of a free hit at the top of the order. No, you haven't done it, but think how quickly you can score when the field's spread. Think how quickly you could score when there's only 2 guys outside. And so that was more, I don't think as much of a data-led kind of decision. Maybe we'd have to ask a bit more on a hunch of, this is the actual team makeup that we had. We've got a spot as an opener that we need to fill, and we feel like your attributes could go and do that. And actually that season, I remember having quite a high strike rate, but not as good at average. And it took me a little while to work out the role, but certainly, most of us want to bat as high up the order as we can in T20, and it's probably like Freddie would say, how you would judge players very differently, and the guys who bat in the top 3, the metrics you're looking for compared to the guys who bat 5, 6, 7, which is probably seen as one of the toughest roles, actually. But the numbers I felt like in my own head is, there's something I would dip into at different times and different. So I sort of try and match up my game to, are there any holes in my game? So I might go to Freddie and say, okay, I've been asked to go and open the innings. What, if you were going to analyze against me, what would you be telling Stuart Broad to bowl? What areas am I weak? What bowlers' styles?
Fist stump, bit full and move it away from you early. First 10 balls. Got to get him in the first 10 balls. If you don't,
he'll have a whoosh at one and nick one. So, but they were the kind of thing. I remember working with Nathan Leamon, and I said, right, you're in the opposition, write me out. We do this stuff for the opposition players. I want you to do one on me, and I want you to see, what you would write down if you were going to play against me. And that actually led me to working on, I think it was leg spin and even off spin. I was like, wow, I'm really not taking advantage of when I face the off spinner. I just sort of get off strike, and there was an area on the field that I wasn't hitting any boundaries. So I'd go to the nets and try and work on that and become a more complete player or such in that sense. And I knew then as a player, if I could match up the power players, if I could get out of that, then I was into my other role that I'd been doing before. So that was but even now I'd still have teams that I would go to or play, or coaches go, yeah, I know you're good at the top, but I think we could, use you in the middle for this, and then I'd look at the and you'd be like, the basic numbers are just poles apart. You'd be like, you'd open the innings all day, but then the numbers are very different. So I think of someone like Tim David, who RCB had an exceptional season. He's never going to be an orange cap winner, but impact in sort of those, what does he face on average? 10 balls, 7 balls, 8, 9 balls, something like that. Yeah. But that
more specifically, is it 7, 8 or 9?
7.
So 1 now, he doesn't need to start. But they're the sort of real things that, but we're talking quite a lot about T20 here and how data has affected that. What about Test cricket? What sort of things did you use? Or you said you're a bit of a nerd actually about it. So were you one of the earlier ones to take up on that, or what?
I was always interested in it. Just I liked the feedback. Early on in my career, we'd get the sort of Hawkeye maps of where you're bowling or what lengths you were bowling, maybe at lunch or tea, that you could have. It was old school print out, have a look at your lengths. But how it evolved, probably the biggest moment of data that helped me in my career actually came through the Nottinghamshire analyst, Krunal. I'd bowled averagely for Notts a couple of games, 2018, 19 maybe, and he came to me and he said, I just run some numbers and I looked at all your best spells throughout your career, and your leave percentage when you're bowling brilliantly is really low, sort of 13, 14%. For Notts, the first 2 games, you picked up a couple of twofers, but your leave percentage has been 33, 34%. So basically meaning in that over, I'm getting left 2 or 3 balls, 2.5 balls. So he said, why don't you work on over the next couple of games of getting that leave percentage as low as you can. Basically, anything under 20% is world class. Anything over 20%, you've had an okay day. And he started logging every single ball for me, and it worked for the rest of my career. Honestly, at the end of each day, I'd reflect on those numbers, and it would tell me if I had a good day, took wickets, I'd be under 20%. If I was 1 for 80, I'd be over 20%. And that was something that I held on to and actually put into my training as well. So I'd have the analysts come to the net every single bowling spell. I'd bowl at a batter and just log it, to be honest, not by sort of anything fancy there, just pen and paper. Just, I'm going to bowl 36 balls. How many do I get left? And then it just ingrained in my mindset that get my leave percentage as low as I can. And that's why I was a bowler that needed action. I needed excitement, drama, theatre when I was bowling. I wasn't someone that could just bowl 7-2 and settle in for 6 overs and 6 maidens. So that really reflected my character, that make the batter play, make the batter make a decision. And if I was going to get a low leave percentage, I was going to have a good day.
And just on that, I assume that was to both right and left-handers. That was a thing for you. So did that influence why you started going round the wicket more to left-handers, because it made them play more from that angle? Because that was for like in the last sort of 10 years or so when I've worked in cricket, if I was to come up with one of the most like compelling examples of where someone has changed something and it has led to changes in their results, you going round the wicket and to left-handers massively reduced your average against lefties. You started playing. They started playing at the ball more. You started hitting the stumps more. You bowled fuller. Like there was there's a bit of a narrative there around what happened. I just wonder if that was related.
I mean, I look at that being coach-led, Otis Gibson, and a bit of me, but actually I reckon Otis Gibson would have got that from data, and so the Aussies were coming over 2015, and big left-handed group of them, Chris Rogers, Shaun Marsh, it looked like there was going to be 6 or 7 potentially throughout the series. Gibbo came to me in the March, bear in mind the test series is probably July, and said, look mate, Aussies are coming, lefties, you're averaging 37 against left-handers in test match cricket. If you keep doing that for the series, you might not play. Do you want to make a change? I said, it makes sense actually, because I'm a 6'6", over the wicket, try and swing the ball back. If I bowl the perfect in-swinger, the likelihood is hits them on the pad and is going over the top of the stumps because the height I'm delivering it from. So let's have a look at doing something different. So from that time, we started bowling around the wicket in all the nets, working on alignment, focusing hugely on that. And I wasn't brave enough to do it in the first Test match, actually. At Cardiff, I bowled over the wicket. And I knew I wanted to get round the wicket. I was like, come on, I just need to get into the series. And second innings, I went round the wicket and got Chris Rogers caught in the slips. And that gave me the confidence to then put it into practice going forward. And I don't know the exact numbers on it, but I obviously knew it made a huge change to me. And I think certainly for a couple of years, I was averaging like 13 or 14 against left-handers from round the wicket. And that was career changing for me, because suddenly I could bring the LBW and bowled in. I was still making batters play. I crucially there was no cut shot at all. I had to bowl a terrible ball to get cut through the offside. So I was eliminating runs that could be scored. And I just had full control of what I was doing. And by the time 2019 came and David Warner, and I'd worked out the data and the stats on how I was going to look to bowl at him, that I was ingrained in what I was doing. I could deliver the ball exactly where I wanted it to.
By that point, I think, because I had a little look at the numbers, because one of the producers gave me the heads up to have a look at that, and you went from being predominantly over the wicket to then sort of like 50-50 over and round, and then right at the end of your career, you were basically almost always just bowling round the wicket, and it's a really interesting arc from going from one method completely to another. And
I was going to say that keeping wicket, I can only think of you bowling round the wicket to left hand.
Yeah, when did you start keeping? Sort of
in that 14, 15, yeah. So the Aussie series that you mentioned there, and the 8 like I can't ever really remember standing in position for you to deliver the ball over the wicket to a lefty. So, and actually most guys, I can't really think from then on, I feel like everyone sort of goes round the wicket straight away. And
I think the numbers are big on that. Bowlers that used to bowl over, like Flintoff in 05 was a bit of he's round the wicket. What's going on? No one practiced that. And now I think to left-handers, sort of over 70% of balls are bowled round the wicket to them.
Yeah, I think that's probably partly to do with, like, as you said, it brings in LBW more into play.
A bit.
And DRS, so the influence of DRS, which has led to a lot more LBWs for spinners, but also for seamers. Hit the pads, you're more likely to get a wicket than you used to be.
Matthew Hoggard 2005 swing them back is like, it's kind of gone, hasn't it, really?
Yeah.
There's not so many.
Jimmy bowled over, I think he didn't go round quite as much as other bowlers.
And Chris Woakes much better bowler over the wicket. Just natural alignment sort of suits nipping it across the lefty. Didn't quite ever settle round the wicket to bring the stumps into play enough. But ultimately, you have to find something that really suits you. But for me, that taller bowler around the wicket, sort of Freddie 05 style, moving the ball away, just actually annoys me I didn't do it sooner. You know what I mean? What was I doing? Wasted sort of 6-7 years at the start of my career by not doing it. But that data, without a doubt, played two massive roles in my career. Jose, I want to pick your brain on an incident with Nathan Leamon, England analyst for a long time. He held some numbers or boards up to Captain Morgs at some stage. You were playing in that game.
Yeah, he did it for a little while. I think to start with, none of us even really noticed what was going on. And Morgs was a fantastic captain in the sense that he never gave off the impression that he was big into numbers, but he was very prepared, very studious, very interested in all elements of captaincy. And like Freddie was talking earlier, that collaborative approach of what's his instinct telling him, what's the coach's instinct, what do the numbers say, and then making a informed decision from that. And he and Nathan had created a sort of supercomputer that could run 1,000, 10,000, maybe 1 million outcomes on what was going to happen at that any point in time in the match, and then who should be the preferred bowler that we had in our lineup to bowl the next over.
The first chat GPT for cricket.
Pretty much, yeah. So it just sort of gave another live decision-making tool. And it wasn't that Morgs just followed it blindly, like, oh, I'm not captain, it's someone else doing it. Oh, it's number one. Like I remember being in the under 11s, my mum used to write down which bowlers I should bowl when. And it's not quite like that, but it's just another decision-making tool. And I remember it sort of really dividing opinion. I remember Michael Vaughan sort of doing something about, if it's got to this stage and a captain needs that kind of help, what is the captain actually doing? Is he fit for the job? And then you actually think about all the other sports of, you're a big F1 fan, live data in there, the football, they're all watching stuff, and the manager is making decisions from the sidelines. I actually think it's something that will grow more and more into cricket. And it's no different from, running a message down to fine leg and saying, have you thought of bowling this guy at this next over? But I remember using that in 2022 in the World Cup in Australia with Nathan as well. I remember this time where I'd be looking up, and obviously he'd be like, 18 out of 20 we'd make the same decision or something, and it was against Sri Lanka at Sydney. And they got off to a really fast start, and I'd been using Mark Wood outside the power play because he was bowling too fast to only have two fielders outside the ring, and one side was a little bit shorter. But Nathan's number was saying you've got to bowl Mark Wood, and I think it was the 5th over, and I was really torn because I was thinking that would be to the short side. This Kusal Mendes was the batter who'd been playing quite well, quite liked picking it up, and it was like just looked like a real risk reward type move for me. And I was like, I don't feel comfortable for it, but actually probably is the best option because we need wickets, and Woody's probably the best option. So we went with it. It actually didn't really work out as we wanted it to.
Went for 25.
Yeah, so thanks for that. But there's so many different examples of when those things happen, and I do think this will become more and more. I played for Gujarat Titans, and Ashish Nehra was very active on. I know he's not the analyst, but he's the coach, being very active on the sideline about who to bowl when, what ends people should bowl, what field to have. Even so almost live decision making from the side, which I think it's always been a bit frowned upon in cricket, which I don't really know. Well, it should be. I'm sure Patrick Mahomes is mic'd up to the coach, isn't he? And he's got a whole playbook on his arm that he's looking at. The manager in football is making those decisions. Formula One they're altering the car from the pit lane in different ways, aren't they? So I think there's potential for cricket to do more and more of that. And I'm sure at the IPL, did you have an active role in sort of live decision making, or are there times where like it's just an easy win? You're like, I've got something right now that can impact the game. And in T20, every ball is vital. So
yeah, well, I completely agree with your sort of general sentiment. Like, I think this is just going to become more of a thing that we see, and I think it's the reason why there's a bit of hesitancy towards it is like cricket sort of so. For a long time has been, the captain goes out onto the field and makes the decisions, but increasingly that is changing. And I think, as you said, in T20, because of the fine margins, sometimes there will be something that's like, hang on a second, if we move that fielder a little bit this way, or if we make sure we bowl this bowler in the next over, that's massive. Whereas in Test cricket, you can allow the game to sometimes drift a little bit more, and a message can be run out via drinks. But in the IPL, we had quite it was Andy, myself, Mo, Mallow, who's a spin coach, Richard Housel, and then DK, who's obviously you've been commentating with him at Sky. DK was very animated, similar to Ashish Nehra as well, in terms of moving fielders and making adjustments. And there were a couple of times in really tight games where DK made small adjustments to the field, just basically by getting up and moving, as you see a football manager do. And I remember one game, I'm trying to remember exactly which one it was. I think it was against Chennai, where he moved third man fractionally finer, just by a few meters, and the ball pretty much went straight to that guy next ball, and would have been 4 had it not been, and it was the last over. And don't know what would have happened had the ball gone for 4, but those little moments are hugely valuable.
God, I could imagine a few captains I've played under getting a bit grisly with that as well.
Yeah,
if that
absolutely.
Ball went the other way.
Yeah, I mean that's and that's the other thing as well. I mean, it would be dependent on the captain to an extent. I mean, if MS Dhoni's out there, I don't think DK is doing that. But Rajat Patidar was really open to that kind of stuff. He's a young captain and was willing to make changes like that. And sometimes, just in terms of my own input, sometimes it's actually like holding ourselves to our pre-match plans. So in those discussions, Andy, Mo, DK, whoever, a lot can be said, and I'm sat there next to them. And sometimes I'll get involved where actually I feel like maybe we're deviating a little bit too much from what we might have agreed at the start of the game. So we might be getting a bit too. They might be getting a bit too funky. Almost trying to. They're keen to win. They're keen to lose a game, and sometimes it's actually just anchoring us to. Hang on, guys. We've still got an over of Krunal Pandya to bowl. He's been a brilliant bowler for us this season. If we bowl that guy, we're not going to finish Krunal, and he's been great. And it's like, okay, maybe we don't need to do that. So you play different roles at different times. But yeah, the in-game stuff I think is only going to head in one direction, and we're seeing that. I think.
Yeah, I think obviously at RCB there's one name that was an easy retention for you, Virat Kohli. What was your relationship like with him? Did he look for things from you as an analyst or things to help his game? Tell us a little bit about Virat's relationship with yourself.
So I've never worked with him whilst he was captain. My first year at RCB was when we had Faf as captain. But in terms of his interaction with data, there's pretty minimal in terms of day to day. But where he is absolutely brilliant is we have team meetings, we have batting meetings, and in those meetings, quite often I'll lead that by sharing information. I will go through bowler by bowler what balls have they got? Where do they bowl at different phases of the innings? And that's really just a prompter for a discussion between the guys in the room. And you can see Virat's like cricketing brain kick in those moments, and his contributions to those meetings are often excellent. And he'll pick up stuff sometimes that the data doesn't say, sometimes that it does say. He's not necessarily asking for lots of data, but what is reassuring is that his like gut instinct, quite often you'll then go away and look at the data and you're like, actually completely matches up. And that I think you get that with quite a few players. I've actually had it a bit with Sam Curran as well in the 100. Quite often he'll say things and then you go away and look at it, or you've already done your research and it matches up with that, which is, I think, is always quite an impressive trait from a player.
The England head coach, you've worked with Baz McCullum in the white ball stuff. As a player playing under him, I didn't get the sense he lent on the data too much. Was he just hiding that from the players, or
he's definitely at the end of the spectrum that uses it slightly less? If you just need to listen to him talk in the media, let alone in the dressing room, about the emphasis he places on instinct and going out there and kind of having an uncluttered mind, and I think that's a big part of his coaching philosophy. That's not to say he didn't ask for stuff. Like, he's you don't get to where Baz got to in his career without having a cricketing mind that's interested in those kind of things, and he definitely did ask for bits and bobs. But if I was to put different coaches on a spectrum, as I said, he'd be at the sort of slightly lesser end. But Jos, I mean, you obviously work with him as well.
Yeah, no, he would be at the lesser end, and I think Baz is a very clever coach, and you're sort of coaching the people you're coaching at the time. So in different environments, he could probably fluctuate a little bit, but I think he uses it much less. He encourages instinct. He encourages discussion. That's one of the big things he would like to use. And he might use data to encourage a discussion at times. So he wants players to talk to players and get to know each other really well. What do they like? What do they like to feel? I'd say he's more of a feel coach. He likes to create a vibe and an atmosphere. But I think behind the glasses and the cap and the feet up on the table, there's a very inquisitive mind. And I think this is sometimes where sort of the modern cricket gets a bit misconstrued with, people talk about matchups. It kind of to be the word that everyone says on commentary. Oh, this is the matchup. It's the modern thing. It's like, well, back in the day, people just called that cricket knowledge or cricket instinct.
What would you like me to call that on commentary? Go on.
I just feel like,
the Jose Boutlier version of matchups. Go on, what is it?
I think Dhoni was doing matchups a while ago, back in the day, before it became sort of in the...
Go on, then, give me a word.
What can we call it?
It's
just like game intuition, is it? It's just like let's bowl an off spinner at the left hander. It's not someone's
game intuition
match up and gone that'll work. I think back in the day, people that might work actually.
But is it not so much what you're sort of saying is like it's a matchup doesn't have to be data driven.
No.
That's the point. It's like matchup have existed for a long time. I mean, Harold Larwood bowling bodyline to Don Bradman was probably a matchup. But it just wasn't based on data. It was based on...
And people have data. Like you mentioned, you made a great sentence earlier about data isn't just numbers.
Yeah.
Data can be experiences. It can be quantified in loads of different ways. And people talk about Dhoni's captaincy, and it's like he sees things before it's happened. But he is a fountain of knowledge and data. So he hasn't collected it and written it all down on his laptop. But if you have that discussion, and that's where I believe it needs to be, there's an element of collaboration and then some kind of conviction, and that's where teams work really well and go, this is our style, and if we're undecided, we'll go with this. It's where teams get a bit, say Freddie wants to get really involved with, he's got some great data, but the coach is like, I don't want that, and the captain wants something different as well, and that's just teamwork. That it's just not working. Be aligned, you've got to you need that alignment. And if for McCullum and Stokes, I would say they don't look like classroom-led lads who want to sit down and pore over data, but they will have meetings in different ways, whether it's sat having a coffee or they're playing golf and they're sat in a buggy. And Stokesy might say to him, what do you reckon about round the wicket to this guy? And then that's actually then a similar kind of thing. They start a discussion that they can go and ask question of the analyst if they want. They can talk about their previous experiences, or then bring you in. How did you find it when you went round the wicket to this guy? So different teams will want to do it in a little bit different way, but having that alignment and conviction to it. And I played for Rajasthan Royals, and they, we hung our hat on data pretty much. It was like the data tells us this. Shimron Hetmeyer was a fantastic player, and it was like, no, his entry point is from the 10th or 12th over onwards. And I'm like, he's amazing, get him in earlier. But it's like, no, but for our team and for this role, and Hetty would sit in the dressing room with his shirt off, no kit on, and be like, well, I'm not needed till the 12th over. That's my entry point.
Living the dream.
And I was like, I want you in earlier because if you could get 40, you might get 80. But
Yeah.
but there was alignment, and that was a very clear way of whether it's right or wrong. It doesn't really matter. It's like we're all in and we all buy into this, and you need that. But I think cricket will go further and further in different ways to make use of it better and find players who can be a bit resistant. I'd say I'm that way inclined. I was a bit resistant to data before. I had my own questions that I liked. You were talking about leave percentage earlier. As a batter, I quite looking at what's my strike rate without my boundaries. So I would minus the balls faced for my boundaries and take that off my score and sort of work out what my strike rate was without that. And that sort of allowed me to realise how productive I was being from the balls that I wasn't hitting to the boundary. And if I could get that strike rate up around 55, 60, I knew my actual overall strike rate when I bring the boundaries back into that would be really high. But that sort of data type thinking, I would say, allowed me to play better in my mind as well, but because it got me into a mindset that I want to score. I need to score. Like I need to find singles and run hard and get twos instead of ones to get that boundary less strike rate or whatever you call it high as possible. So there's very clever ways, I think, and I come back to Morgan as one of those guys. You would never know he knew all the stats and the data and the numbers, but he knew they were the players that he was dealing with that weren't sort of hanging off that. But he was very clever at dripping in things that he'd probably worked closely with Nathan on into a normal conversation with Adil Rashid about the style of bowling or the pacey bowls on a certain wicket. Rash would probably say, it's, what a genius. He's just sort of come up with that, about this venue. But he'd probably, Nathan would have to take a back seat and not take the credit for something that Morgs would come across as a bit of cricket intuition.
I do think just lastly on this topic, because I think this is like the most important part really, is actually like there are lots of analysts out there and there's lots of data out there, but it's the environment and the nature of the discussions that they feed into is absolutely essential. And if you are, I think, you can have honest discussions between, whether sometimes it's the analyst feeding bits in, sometimes it's just a single bit of data, or sometimes they're sat around the table as well. Honest discussions between decision makers, but then when it gets to the players, it's often quite minimal. You don't want to be overbearing in terms of the amount of information that they've got, because going back to Baz, the thing that I think took away most from working with Baz was that like emphasis on empowering the player to go out there and be free and be liberated. And I think if they're sat there worrying about any kind of data analysis, then that's not going to enable them to do that. But that doesn't mean that doesn't happen. And at RCB, I'd say we were at the slightly other end of the spectrum in terms of we would do a lot of preparation, but a lot of the players wouldn't know that. And I think that the art is in that. And I think there are lots of different ways of managing that environment, but sometimes it's going and playing golf, or sometimes it's just making sure your meetings are really efficient. But that's key, I think, is the way in which you communicate the message is massive.
And Freddie, the 100's about to start. You've helped the Oval Invincibles men go back-to-back, famously at Lord's last year. Hat-trick?
Yeah, three-peat, hopefully.
That's You're already calling it.
Three-peat.
They've already got the ring sorted. They got it all there. The team to beat.
Well, that would be the goal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you got a great side, probably led by a few players, but the Curran brothers are almost sort of the basis of that energy. You sort of kept links with Surrey in a sense, deliberately?
Yeah, well, we've always had, I mean, at the very beginning in the first draft, you were unable to, I can't remember exactly, but you could show a couple of icon players, I think they were called, and we've managed to maintain that core of Surrey guys throughout. I mean, the two Curran brothers, we had Jace at the beginning, J. Roy, and we've had Will Jacks throughout. But I mean, the other thing about those three, Curran, and Jacks, as well as they're all-rounders, which has made building our team a lot easier. And that's, going back to the auctions and the drafts. If you have one all-rounder, let alone three, and we actually had Narayan as well for the first few years, you're suddenly in a position where you have a lot more options in terms of your auction or your draft. You're not having to try and find a way to balance your team. Like we found at Oval, we've always had enough batting depth and we've always had enough bowling depth. So it's sort of just about actually finding players to fill the different roles, because we're just blessed with all-rounders. So in normal 11-a-side cricket, which the 100 is, that's super useful. In the IPL now with the impact player, it's actually changed things a little bit because all-rounders are actually a fraction less valuable because you can just subbing a bowler or subbing a batter. But
Just to say, on the 100, obviously the different playing conditions, the 5 balls, 10 balls, how do you code it differently? Or have you noticed any different trends that in the 100 you're like, actually there's an advantage to player X bowling 10 balls in a row? Or are there anything sort of nuances in the 100 that you've sort of noticed?
yeah, well, there's a few. I mean, obviously the bowling 10 in a row thing is really interesting, particularly for new ball bowlers who can swing the ball. And as we've seen in the 100 in the last couple of years, the balls have been going around corners. So weirdly, the 100, when it initially started, I think the natural indication would be like it's probably going to favour more aggressive batters because it's 20 balls shorter than a T20. But actually, the way that the balls have behaved and the fact that you can bowl 10 balls in a row. So in theory, you could bowl 20 of the first 25 balls of a match in the 100. If you're a swing bowler, like an Adam Milne or Dan Worrell, exactly, you can take the first 20 of the 25 balls. The ball is still hard and new and swinging. And that's actually played a massive role in the 100 in the last few years. Actually, it's not gone the way that you thought it might go, in that it was like, oh, it's going to favour necessarily super aggressive batters. You have, to an extent, got to have a method to survive against that. Some players just opt to try and hit the ball into the stands and maybe the ball stops swinging. That's another way of going about it. I mean, you and Salty have formed a pretty decent pair at the top for Manchester.
I was going to say, Broady, that probably wasn't on your agenda, would it? If you're an opening bowler, trying to bowl 20 of the first 25 initially.
To be honest, with how those balls nip around with the big 100 stamp on, it's quite attractive.
Might come back.
Yeah.
No. I don't think I'd do it. But actually, you say data. Edgerton Park Cricket Club, where I grew up, we had a river either end. So I hit it into the stands. Our data back in the early 2000s, was early doors, hit the new ball into the river, get it wet, and they had to bowl the wet ball for 40 overs. So same sort of theory used at Edgerton Park on a Saturday afternoon. But I mean, it's been bowler friendly, to be honest, with that new ball, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I think and that's a bit of that swallow your pride. Sometimes as a batter, you have to bat without ego. And you say initially you think it's 20 balls less, I've got to go out and smack it. It's a short game. But that might be the most vital time in the match, where if you can, what feels defensively, but save wickets and then actually attack the remaining 80 balls of the innings.
Freddie, AI playing any role in analysis at the moment?
Yeah, it's beginning to. So there are two areas where it's contributing. One is like I'll increasingly use AI for some of the more basic things that I do day to day that just saves me time, and that might be something as simple as like, what is the average age of Oval Invincibles' squad this year? And I can just ask ChatGPT that, and it will have the data because it's got the squad on Cricinfo, and it will tell me the average age. And I'm pretty confident in the findings of that. Rather than it might save me, a few minutes. It might only take me 3-4 minutes to do that manually, but it obviously takes 10 seconds to do it with ChatGPT or with any other AI model. So that's like the low-hanging fruit. And then again, going back to the data scientists that I've mentioned earlier, I have conversations with guys who will build models, and a lot of them will be leaning on AI and machine learning to sort of help build the model. So it is influencing cricket, often in ways that we can't yet see, but it will influence the models that are built by data scientists, which in turn influence the kind of players that I suggest, which then hopefully contributes to squads that are built, and therefore, it is influencing the game. I think it's influencing all walks of life, but it's definitely... the onus is on the analyst, I think, to try and keep pace with that and make sure that you are best utilising it, I think.
Absolutely. And thanks for joining us, Freddie. I've found that really interesting, and hopefully our listeners and viewers will see what happens off the field to help teams win.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Freddie. Thank you.
Thanks to our partner, Sage.
And follow and subscribe anywhere you get your favourite podcast.
We're back on Tuesday.